Let's bring in our justice reporter, Evan Perez, and our aviation correspondent, Renee Marsh. Evan, the New York Times is reporting that this flight change information was conveyed through ACARS. But what are you hearing?
Well, Jake, you know, there's so much confusion over what all these communication systems that these aircraft had. You know, I'm told by officials that they've gotten this data from Malaysians, and the Malaysians have shared this with British and U.S. investigators, and the data indicates that at some point, someone changed the program of where this aircraft was headed and put in coordinates for it to head west from its course that it was over the Gulf of Thailand. Now, how that information was transmitted, that simply I don't know. And that is one of the many questions, of course, that this brings up. But they do know, they believe with some certainty that the aircraft veered from its course on its way to Beijing and did so on purpose because someone changed the heading in the computer system, Jake.
Now, Renee, whether or not this information about the programming change for the flight path,
More on the search for the missing Malaysian Airlines jet. A new report suggests somebody deliberately flew the jet hundreds of miles off its original course, and that whoever was doing the flying knew very well how to follow so-called navigational waypoints. More on those and their importance in just a moment, but first, take a look at the wall over here. We showed you all the potential places the plane could have gone. Leah's going to be joining us if it flew for more hours. Now the Reuters news agency is reporting that investigators say an aircraft believed to be the missing jet was following a route in one direction, headed right there. Based on that, they say the plane could have ended up around these Indian islands in the waters where crews are still searching. But these are not the Bahamas. Experts on this area tell us there are hundreds of mostly empty islands with dense forests covering a lot of them. Researchers say the few people who do live there are members of ancient tribes that date back to the Stone Age. They're cut off from the modern world, and they apparently do not take kindly to outsiders. Case in point, in 2006, tribe members reportedly killed 2 fishermen and then fired arrows to drive off a helicopter the Indian government sent to retrieve the bodies. Leah Gabriel is here with us. She's a pilot herself and was for the military. Waypoints, back to these waypoints. They're sort of like highways in the sky, right?
Well, in simple terms, Chef, that's right. And you know that the Reuters report you mentioned, it suggests that this plane may have been flying an aviation corridor in the sky. So I'm going to show you kind of what we're talking about here. Look at this chart. You see these lines here. You see these lines here. You see these lines. You see these lines. You see these lines. You see these lines here. 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 These are the so-called aviation corridors or jet routes.
Like these?
Yeah, those are aviation corridors.
Okay.
And you see there's like little points along the way. Those are essentially waypoints that help define that route.
Like
now,
something for which you would watch when you're flying, or a ping you would look for? Or?
Essentially, they're GPS coordinates, they're fixed points, and you would have a name for them so that when you're talking to the air traffic controllers, they know the point that you're talking about.
So you can communicate about them. Got it, go on.
Exactly, they help define these routes, among other things. Okay, so now let's go ahead and put this map.
This is crazy, go on.
So this is the map that Reuters suggests may have been taken by the plane,
right? This beginning with Kuala Lumpur's airport.
Exactly, Kuala Lumpur. Then it suggests, then the last known point of contact is up here.
Right.
At near this waypoint, okay? Then the report suggests that the military radar may have picked up the plane pointing towards this waypoint over here, okay? And then that the military indicates it plots a path that may have had it headed towards this other waypoint just above it, and then heading towards this waypoint over here, which that heads towards the Andaman Islands, okay? Now, when you look at this
like, why the hell would you do this, except that you're trying to throw people off your trail, I guess?
Well, I mean, when you look at the whole picture,
The letter Shin, according to our sages, is a letter of fire. And in Kabbalah, the concept of symmetry is represented by this word grace. When something finds grace in our eyes, it means we're in tune with it. Everything is in the right place. The first time the word chen appears in the Torah is when Noach found grace in God's eyes. And it's pointed out that the word for Noach and chen are the same letters, just reversed. They're in symmetrical form. Noach found grace in God's eyes. The root shin appears in many words. Shana, which means year, which means constant cycle and change. And the word for change itself, shinui, comes from the root shin. So here we have a paradoxical idea that sleep and serenity represents, we'll call it non-movement, and year and change, of course, is change. And as we saw in other letters, sometimes a root or a letter will encompass both opposite ideas. There's a verse that says, Ani Hashem lo shaniti. I am God, I have not changed. The word change, shaniti, is based on the letter shin. So we see a beautiful idea here is God is unmovable, is permanent. And yet all change only comes through God's activity, God's agency. So I am God, I have not changed, really means God is the immovable force that moves everything. And this is the idea of the shin, which is fire, and getting lost in the flames. The numerical value of shin equals 300. When you take the name Elohim, which is the name of judgment, and you spell out the letters that make up the word, their full spelling. For example, the Aleph is Aleph Lamed Pei, etc. All of those letters equal 300. Elohim is Gematria 87, which equals Hateva, nature. So we see a beautiful connection that the fire of the shin is the power and we'll call it the electromagnetic force within nature.
Live long and prosper.